All right. So, you know how in the movies, mergers and acquisitions are always these like super high stakes, kind of like a poker game?
Right.
People in slick suits making these huge decisions
Yeah,
worth billions of dollars.
definitely.
But we're diving into the reality of M&A today with this book by Jeffrey C. Hooke.
Okay.
It's called M&A, A Practical Guide to Doing the Deal.
hmm
And honestly, I gotta say, the truth is so much more interesting than what you see in the movies.
Yeah, it's definitely not all Hollywood drama. Like the book, it actually highlights how many of these deals are what you might call middle market transactions.
Yeah.
It's not always, these huge corporations battling it out for global domination. Sometimes it's as simple as your local grocery store, merging with the bakery down the street.
Okay, so less Wall Street, more Main Street.
Exactly.
I can see that. But here's something that I found really surprising in the book. Apparently, over half of these acquisitions, they totally fail to actually increase the buyer's value.
Yeah.
So if that's true, I mean, why even bother? Why go through all that trouble?
Well, yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And it's something we'll definitely unpack as we go. But before we get into all of that, all the potential pitfalls and everything, I think it's important to understand what makes the U.S. M&A market so unique.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. So what is it about the U.S. specifically that makes these types of deals so common here?
So one of the biggest factors is actually the regulatory environment. Compared to a lot of other countries, the U.S. tends to have way less government intervention when it comes to things like antitrust issues, right? And on top of that, there are also fewer worker protections here, which, that can be a really significant factor when you're talking about those cost-cutting measures that companies often bank on after a merger happens.
So it's kind of like a more hands-off approach leads to a more active M&A scene.
Exactly.
Interesting. Although that kind of sounds like a double-edged sword.
For sure.
Like, yeah, you have a lot of activity, but you also have a pretty high risk of things going south.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it creates this really dynamic, fast-moving landscape, right?
Yeah.
Where companies, they really need to be strategic. They've got to be thorough in their approach.
Yeah.
And that's where we really get into the core of Hooke's insights.
Okay. So we've talked about how the M&A landscape, it's a lot more complex than what we see in the movies.
Right.
But let's circle back to that thing about acquisitions often failing to boost the buyer's value.
Yeah.
If that's the case, why are so many companies still so eager to jump into these deals? What's the big payoff they're hoping for?
Well, it's usually not as simple as, just wanting to get bigger. Hooke, he actually lays out 10 key motivations for M&A in his book.
Okay.
And some of them are actually pretty surprising. They wouldn't immediately come to mind,
Okay. Like what? Give me an example. What's one that wouldn't be obvious?
Okay, so think about the whole process of developing a brand new product. You're starting from scratch.
Yes.
It's a gamble, right? I mean, Nielsen, they did this research, and it turns out that only about 10% of new products that are launched actually end up succeeding.
Wow.
So instead of, rolling the dice on something brand new, a lot of companies, they see acquiring a company that, already has that established product, they already have the customer base. It feels like a much safer bet.
Right.
It might be more expensive, but it's less risky in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like less, what if this totally flops, and more, let's just capitalize on something that's already working.
Exactly.
Are there any other motivations like that? Like things that go beyond just wanting to just expand their market share or something?
Totally, yeah. One big one is talent. Especially in tech, the competition for the best engineers, the top specialists, it's fierce.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes, acquiring a whole company, it's actually faster and it's way more efficient than trying to, poach those people one by one.
Right. It's like saying, we need that expertise now, so let's just bring the whole team on board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's this other thing that I find super interesting. Hooke calls it the swan effect.
The swan effect. Okay, now that sounds intriguing. I'm curious. Tell me more.
So the swan effect, this is where a company uses M&A, not just for the direct financial gains. It's not just about the numbers. It's about how they're perceived.
Okay.
They want to change their image, right?
Okay.
Especially in the eyes of investors. So they want to be seen as more innovative, more forward thinking. They want to be that swan that's just gliding ahead of all the competition.
Right. So it's not just about the numbers. It's about perception.
Yeah.
It's about how how they're seen.
Exactly.
Do you have like a real world example of that? Like how that actually works?
Yeah, so a good example is Sanofi, the pharmaceutical company. Back in 2011, they acquired Genzyme.
Okay.
So at the time, Sanofi, they were mainly known for like traditional chemical-based drugs, kind of the old school.
Okay.
Genzyme, on the other hand, they were like a rising star in the biotech world.
Okay.
So by acquiring them, Sanofi, they basically positioned themselves as like, a leader, an innovator in this cutting edge field.
Yeah.
And that instantly boosted their image.
Right.
And that, it had a ripple effect on their stock price.
Of course, yeah. It's kind of like that old saying, you are who you associate with, but like on a whole corporate scale.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So we've got these different M&A tactics at play, like, talked about synergy, right?
Right.
Where it's like you're aiming for those cost cuts, maybe some revenue gains.
Yeah.
We've got the swan effect for image.
Yep.
And then there's also like arbitrage, which
Yeah.
I'm thinking of as kind of like the buy low, sell high strategy.
Exactly, yeah.
But with entire companies.
You got it.
And those tactics, I mean, they're different, but it seems like the end goal is usually the same, right? It's about increasing that shareholder value.
Usually, yeah. That's the name of the game.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's shift gears for a sec. Let's say you're a company and you're ready to make an acquisition. How do you even find the right target? Like, is there like a secret database somewhere of businesses that are for sale? I mean, it's got to be more complicated than just like browsing a corporate dating app, right? Like looking for a company with great synergy and a killer stock price, swipe right if interested.
Exactly.
So how does that search actually work in the real world?
You'd think it'd be like this really streamlined system these days, but Hooke actually points out that it's kind of messy.
Really?
Yeah, like imagine having to contact like 100 different companies.
Wow.
Just to find, maybe 2 that you might actually make an offer to.
Wow, that's a lot of like filtering.
It's a lot of tire kicking.
It makes you wonder if it's even like worth it, right?
It is though, and that's where due diligence comes in.
Yeah.
It's about, finding the hidden gems, but more importantly, it's about avoiding those like disastrous pitfalls.
Right.
Like Hooke talks about HP's acquisition of autonomy.
Okay.
And that, that was a rough one. They end up having to write down almost $9 billion.
Ouch.
Yeah, because they missed some pretty big red flags during that due diligence process.
So it's less like, corporate speed dating.
Yeah.
And more like you need to hire like a private investigator.
Exactly.
To really like dig into this other company's history.
You got it. You got to scrutinize everything. You're talking financials, operations, their legal standing, the whole 9 yards.
Right, because you're not just buying a product, right?
No.
You're potentially like, absorbing their workforce.
Yeah.
Their culture, their technology.
It's a big decision.
Yeah. Okay, so let's flip the script for a second.
Okay.
Let's say you're the one who's, you're holding the for sale sign.
Right.
How do you know when is the right time to sell?
Well, Hooke, he really emphasizes that timing the market, it's crucial.
Okay.
Especially for businesses that are in what are called cyclical industries. So, think of companies that produce like raw materials, for example. Their performance, it's often tied to those economic cycles.
Right.
And selling at the peak of a cycle, it can make a huge difference.
So it's like don't wait for the downturn when you're kind of forced to sell at a discount, right?
Exactly, yeah. Strike while the iron's hot, as they say.
Exactly, yeah. What happens once a company actually does decide to put themselves on the market? What's that process like?
So it becomes this multi-stage process. Often they'll bring in an investment bank to kind of act as like a matchmaker.
Okay.
Right? They help the seller navigate all the complexities of finding the right buyer, negotiating the terms of the deal, and ultimately, getting that deal across the finish line. It's complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot more involved than just, shaking hands and calling it a day.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive on M&A.
We have.
From that's surprisingly high failure rate we talked about, to all those hidden motivations, and of course how important due diligence and timing really are. I think it's safe to say that M&A, it's way more than just, a simple financial transaction.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a strategic chess game, right? You got to understand the motivations, the players, all the potential risks involved. And even though it doesn't always play out like it does in the movies,
Yeah,
it's a fascinating world with incredibly high stakes and potentially even higher rewards.
absolutely. And who knows, maybe the next time you see an M&A announcement, you'll be the one saying, I saw that coming a mile away.
Right.
So thanks to the insights from Jeffrey C. Hooke and his book, M&A, A Practical Guide to Doing the Deal, I think we're all a little bit savvier about this whole intricate dance of buying and selling companies.
I think so too.
It's been fun.
Until next time.
Yeah. See you next time.